Thanks to Baron of Dice, Grey Matter Gaming, and Monument Hobbies for sponsoring this video. After over a year of our boarding actions terrain gathering dust, Games Workshop finally released new full rules for boarding actions in 10th edition. In this video review, we're going to talk about what those rules are, what's changed, and whether or not they're worth your time. I'm Campbell McLaughlin, and I'm about to rue the day I have to sit down and paint a full set of Games Workshop's most complicated terrain. Before we dive in, there are two things we need to cover. First, we'd like to thank Games Workshop for providing us with a preview copy of this book for review purposes. Second, if you'd like to read a written version of this review, you can find it on our website, Goonhammer.com. Link down there. First off, what is Boarding Actions? Boarding Actions is an alternate game mode for Warhammer 40,000. In Boarding Actions, players build 500-point armies using Boarding Actions detachments, then do battle in the tight quarters of a Space Hulk. Boarding action armies are mostly infantry, and boarding action tables are filled with cramped hallways, twisting turns, and operable doors. Boarding Actions largely uses the rules for 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, but it has its own additional core stratagems and rules for movement, shooting, and combat. In this section, we'll cover some, but not all, of the unique rules for Boarding Actions to give you an idea of how the game is played. Let's start with the basics of measuring and movement in Boarding Actions. The big thing in Boarding Actions is that you don't measure through walls. When you measure distance from one model to another, you have to go around any walls, though you can go through open doors. When you draw a line of sight, a model can only see an enemy model if they can draw an unbroken line from their base to their target's base without crossing walls, hatchways, or other models. This means that even your own models will block line of sight, putting units with large bases or too many models at a disadvantage in the tight hallways of the Gallowdark. The close quarters of a Space Hulk make for a lot of hand-to-hand combat. When models charge, they have to move around corners and through doors and measure accordingly. When measuring engagement range, you can fight enemy models within 2 inches of your model if you are fighting through an open hatchway. Units can still arrive via deep strike in Boarding Actions, teleporting into position to take down a foe. One big change in 10th edition Boarding Actions is that when your unit sets up from deep strike, you still count distances through the walls to enemy units, so you've still got to drop more than 9 inches away even if you can't see each other. Models can't fly in Boarding Actions. They'd hit the ceiling! Additionally, movement on flying models is reduced to 9 inches. Also, units lose Scout and can't gain it in Boarding Actions. At the end of the Move Units step of your movement phase, each of your units can attempt to operate a hatchway. To do this, you have to have a model within 1 inch of that door. Meet this condition and you can either close or open the door before your shooting phase. If someone's trying to operate a hatchway with an enemy model on the other side, that model can attempt to stop that operation. To do this, they roll off and the winner gets to choose what happens. Shooting in Boarding Actions works mostly the same as it does in the base game, with a couple of key exceptions. There are 3 changes to note here. First, there's no indirect fire in Boarding Actions. They'd hit the ceiling! Second, blast weapons can only count the models they can see when determining how many models are in the unit for your bonus attacks. Third, you can only allocate attacks to models visible to 1 or more models in the shooting unit. Charging and fighting mostly work the same in Boarding Actions as they do in 40K. The only big differences here are that you can only charge a unit your unit can see, and you can only pile into a unit if you could see it before you started your pile-in. Boarding Actions has its own rules for actions, referred to as tactical maneuvers. In order to do a tactical maneuver, a unit can't be battle-shocked or within engagement range of an enemy unit, and you can't do a maneuver if you were set up on the table that turn, advanced, or fell back. Doing a maneuver means your unit isn't eligible to shoot or charge for the rest of the turn. Although missions may add their own maneuvers, there are 3 core maneuvers players can access. Secure Sight. This can only be done by battle line units. This makes an objective they control sticky, so it stays under your control until you lose it. Set to Defend. Until your next command phase, each time a model in the unit makes a melee attack, they get +1 to hit. Set Overwatch. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, after they move a unit, open a hatchway, declare a charge, or set up a unit, your unit can fire Overwatch at that enemy unit. If you do this, you only hit on an unmodified 6, same as usual. A unit can only fire Overwatch once per turn, but there's no limit on the number of units that can set Overwatch. You might have noticed that firing Overwatch is a tactical maneuver in Boarding Actions. As you also may have guessed, this game mode has different core stratagems. Command Reroll, Counteroffensive, and Insane Bravery are all here, mostly in the same form as the base game. The other two core stratagems are Explosive Clearance, which lets you count and hit models you can't see with blast weapons, and Battlefield Command, which lets one of your leader models use its ability on a friendly unit within 6 inches if it could normally join that unit. Leaders in Boarding Actions don't join units, and their abilities which require a unit to be led don't work. That is, unless you use the Battlefield Command stratagem. There are 6 generic enhancements in Boarding Actions, which allow you to upgrade your characters with abilities like Deep Strike, starting the game with extra command points, operating hatchways before you move, or rerolling wound rolls in melee. The Boarding Actions Compendium has rules for playing Boarding Actions, reprinted missions from the Arcs of Omen books released at the end of 9th edition, and attachments for every faction in the game. There's a ton here, and it covers multiple ways to play, from symmetrical matched playstyle games to more narrative games with wild rules. There are a whopping 55 Boarding Actions detachments, and they're all pretty much brand new. Unlike in 9th edition, these strongly control which units you can bring, and each has a different list. So you can have the Space Marine Terminator Assault detachment, and that's very different from the Phobos detachment in terms of the units and tactics they use. Each detachment comes with the following: a list of units you can take in that detachment with appropriate model counts, rules adaptations for those units, telling you what rules they lose or gain, an army rule and a detachment rule, 2 enhancements, 4 stratagems. There are too many detachments to cover here, but we'll be going into full detail on each and every detachment in future articles on Goonhammer.com. So head over to the site for broad coverage of each faction and check our Start Competing pages for future Boarding Action detachment focus articles. There are a staggering 54 missions in this book, collecting every mission released in 2023's Arcs of Omen campaign book series. These cover everything from competitive symmetrical missions to more narrative missions, and even a set for 3 to 4 players. The only things missing are the missions from White Dwarf magazine, but we're hopeful those will show up in a future compendium release. Alright, you know almost everything you need to know about Boarding Actions. The final question is, should you play it? The short answer is yes. Simply put, Boarding Actions is one of the most fun game modes Games Workshop have come up with in years. It's way more interesting than Combat Patrol, while still being brisk and easy to pick up and play. Instead of just being Diet 40K, it's a distinct game mode that stands on its own merits. The strict unit requirements and detachment options give players lots of freedom while keeping things relatively balanced. It's not necessarily the best game for new players, but it's not a bad next step from Kill Team. Before we go, we've got to address the elephant in the room, which is the terrain. The Boarding Actions terrain looks great and is awesome to play on, but it's a lot to paint. More importantly, it's a real chore to take it apart and set it back up when you want to change configuration between games. It's the biggest downside to Boarding Actions, but you can solve this pretty easily with third-party terrain sets. We recommend Banjua, who we partner with and receive a commission from. Their pre-painted sets look great and are easy to work with, and their alpha boarding area is perfect for your Boarding Actions games. If you couldn't tell, we're excited for this new version of Boarding Actions. The stopgap rules we got last year in a PDF on Warhammer community were fine, I guess, and these new rules update the game for 10th edition while fixing most of its issues. We're looking forward to playing Boarding Actions games with friends, at tournaments, and finding ways to incorporate the system into our future Crusade campaigns. If you're interested in small-scale 40K, or just want faster, fun games without having to commit to a whole 2,000-point army, we'd strongly recommend picking up this compendium and trying out Boarding Actions for yourself. Thank you so much for joining us on our journey into the dark. If you'd like to support our channel, you can do all the typical YouTube things.
Wow, look at that micro-interaction.
And let us know how you're planning on spending your time in the tunnels and causeways of the Gallodark. You can also support us on Patreon for early access to videos and events, access to our Discord, and other cool features. And if you haven't already, you can download the Tabletop Battles app, which already has support for Boarding Actions built in. It's almost like we planned this! We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Baron of Dice, Monument Hobbies, and Grey Matter Gaming, for throwing a wholly reasonable amount of money at us. I've been Campbell McLaughlin, and you won't get bored of these actions. they'd hit the ceiling.